Welcome to Vanguard, where humans aren't the underdogs. We're the endgame. Enjoy the journey.
The blue liquid in Norman Arkenschot's glass fizzed lazily, tiny bubbles, catching the triple sunlight like microscopic stars. He let out a slow sigh, the type that only comes after months of gut-wrenching missions and near-death escapes. The tropical beach of Luma 9 spread before him, like a promise, soft azure waves, pale golden sands, and a sky so clear it looked artificially painted. Norman adjusted his sun hat, his scarred eyebrow twitching as a passing thought threatened to intrude on his carefully crafted piece. He'd promised himself no fighting, no politics, no blood, just sun drinks, and maybe, if luck finally stopped screwing him over, a beautiful companion to share the sunset with. But the universe, ever the prankster, had other ideas. A sharp shadow fell across his lounge chair. Norman didn't bother opening his eyes. Not yet. He sipped his drink again, savoring the mild electric buzz of the blue cocktail that tasted faintly of citrus and rebellion. "Your identification, vacationer," a clipped voice snapped. Norman cracked one eye open. A tall Imperial officer loomed over him, immaculate white uniform practically shimmering against the glaring sky. His hand rested on the butt of a standard-issue blaster, his face twisted into an expression of permanent condescension. Behind him, two stormtroopers scanned the beach with mirrored visors, the barrel ends of their rifles glinting like hungry eyes. "It's in my cabin," Norman drawled, stretching his sun-browned arms as if he had all the time in the galaxy. "Can't this wait? I'm working on my tan." He gestured at his bronze chest, a canvas of scars and quiet stories nobody here would ever know. The officer's nostrils flared like a predator catching a scent. "Imperial Decree 447B requires all off-worlders to carry identification at all times. Stand up." Norman's eyes flicked around. 30 meters to the nearest exit. 40 to the tree line. 3 civilians too close collateral he'd rather avoid. An elderly server approached with a tray wobbling dangerously, his gnarled fingers barely keeping the drinks balanced. "Fine," Norman muttered, rising to his full 6'3" height. The officer stiffened as Norman's scar caught the sunlight, a thin silver line slashing through his eyebrow like a comet scar on a planet's surface. "But you're absolutely ruining a perfectly good tan," Norman added with a smirk. The Imperial scanned Norman's face again, a hint of recognition flickering in his eyes. You look familiar." Norman raised an eyebrow. "I get that a lot. Just another guy who likes sun and sand." He sipped again, slow and deliberate, every move calibrated to provoke yet look harmless. Inside Norman's mind already plotted half a dozen takedown routes. 3 years ago, on Cygnus Prime, he disarmed 5 guards in under 6 seconds. His spine whip safely stashed in the cabin would have turned this into an art piece of chaos. But this was supposed to be vacation. No weapons, no killing, no complications. The server finally reached them, voice trembling. "Your Azure Supernova, sir." He offered to a different vacationer, his tray wobbling like a drunk shuttle. The Imperial stepped backward, bumping into the old man. Norman's arm shot out like a striking viper, snatching 3 glasses in one impossibly smooth movement. The 4th drink, a violent purple concoction, splashed directly across the officer's pristine uniform. "You did that on purpose," the officer roared, shoving the server down onto the sand. Norman's hand twitched. For a moment, the beach disappeared. He saw his fingers closing around the officer's wrist, a precise pivot breaking his stance, the blaster ripped away and repurposed before the stormtroopers could even breathe. But that was not today. Not yet. It was an accident. Norman lied smoothly, setting the drinks down and hauling the old man to his feet. "I'll pay for the cleaning." The officer's face dark and purple stain, blooming like alien mold on his chest. He staggered back, hand flying to his blaster. "Wait! That scar. You're Norman Arkenshot by the Void. Arkenshot, the mercenary." A woman sunbathing nearby gasped so hard she nearly swallowed her towel. Another whispered, "The ghost of Arcturus." Norman flashed them a wolfish grin. "You're confusing me with someone else. I'm just a delivery guy on sabbatical." "System scan, subject Norman Arkenshot." The officer yelled into his Riscom voice, cracking. "Priority Alpha approach with caution." A mechanical voice echoed cold and precise. "Subject Norman Arkenshot. Federation Special Operations. Clearance redacted. Danger level extreme. Do not approach alone." Norman let out a slow exhale. So much for quiet sunsets. "You're wanted in 16 systems." The officer barked, his hand trembling on the blaster. "Suspected of anti-imperial activity." Norman rolled his eyes. "I delivered tax forms last month. Big crime now, huh? What's next?" "Jaywalking charges." "On your knees now." The stormtroopers raised their rifles, energy cells humming. Norman weighed every angle, feeling the old instinct rising like a long-dormant volcano. "Look!" He began, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Let's all—" The officer fired. Norman moved before thought caught up, flipping the small side table with his foot into the officer's knees. He hurled his drink into one trooper's visor liquid, sizzling on the electronics. Norman dove into a roll, crashing into the second trooper's legs like a human missile. Chaos erupted. Blaster bolts hissed past burning air and sand alike. Tourist screams scattering like panicked birds. Norman pivoted, snatched the first trooper's rifle, and smashed the butt into his helmet. He sprinted toward the jungle, zigzagging like a wraith. All he had now was instinct and the swim shorts hugging his hips. No credits, no weapons, no ID. All units subject Arkenshot, fleeing toward jungle coordinates. Priority kill or capture. Norman didn't look back. The burning beach behind him felt like a lifetime ago already. The moment his feet hit the dense underbrush, he muttered to himself with grim amusement, "This is why I can't have nice things." The humid jungle air slapped Norman in the face like a wet towel. He ducked under a tangle of low-hanging vines, feet slipping over mossy roots as the sounds of pursuit echoed behind him. Mechanical shouts, crackling radios, the high-pitched whine of speeder engines slicing through the canopy. Every breath tasted like green, heavy, earthy, alive. Norman's pulse pounded in his temples, a rhythmic reminder that his body was running on instinct now, the old training rising to the surface like a shark fin. He slid down a muddy slope, narrowly avoiding a branch that could have split his skull. Somewhere above, a drone zipped past its searchlight, slicing the foliage in cold sweeps. Norman pressed flat to the ground, mud coating his chest and arms. "Vacation, huh?" he muttered, teeth clenched. "Great choice, Norman. Real smart." After what felt like an eternity of crawling and sprinting in erratic bursts, he stumbled into a small clearing. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the canopy, illuminating a crystal-clear pool fed by a narrow waterfall. The sound of rushing water offered a temporary refuge and a rare moment to catch his breath. Norman knelt at the edge, cupping handfuls of the icy water to splash over his sweat-slick face. It felt like liquid starlight momentarily cooling the inferno burning inside him. His mind was already scanning scenarios: hide underwater, double back, climb into the canopy. Each option weighed against speed exposure and those damn drones. Then he heard it, a faint whistle slicing through the air. Norman didn't think. His right hand shot up, fingers snapping closed around a slender dart barely an inch from his throat. He brought it down slowly, inspecting the gleaming green tip and sniffing it. Almond. Cyanide derivative, maybe. A slow grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Nice try. Silence. I know you're out there, Norman's called, his voice calm but edged like a blade. Hell of a shot. You almost got me. The foliage across the pool rustled. Leaves parted, and she stepped into the clearing like a living hallucination. She was tall, nearly as tall as Norman himself, with skin the color of deep twilight, a violet that seemed to shift in hue with every flicker of dappled sunlight. Her bright green eyes glowed like emerald fire cutting straight into him. What she wore barely qualified as clothing strips of dark leather and shimmering metal strategically wrapped around a body that looked sculpted for war and worship alike. A hunting bow carved from some bone-like material rested easily in her grasp. A quiver of similar darts clung to her hip. For a moment, neither spoke. It felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. You caught my dart, she finally said, her voice melodic and accented in a way that hinted at star systems far beyond Norman's charts. Seems that way, Norman replied, twirling the dart between his fingers. Was this meant to kill me or just ruin my day? She stared at him, lips slightly parted as if she was seeing a ghost. Then, to Norman's utter shock, she dropped to one knee. Vows sat down beside her and placed a fist over her heart. It is done, she declared, voice echoing with a strange, solemn power. You have caught the Seeker's arrow. By the ancient law of the Hollow High, I am bound to you. Norman blinked. I'm sorry, what? I am Nera of the Hollow High, she continued, unwavering. Hunter of the Twilight Clan, by catching my dart, you have proven yourself worthy. I am yours to command, to protect, and her green eyes locked onto his, suddenly softer, almost vulnerable. To bear your powerful offspring. Norman pinched the bridge of his nose. Oh, for fee, I just wanted a vacation, lady. I don't even have my spine whips with me. She rose to her full height in one fluid predatory motion. There is no misunderstanding. The Seeker's arrow finds only the worthy. In 600 cycles, no one has ever caught it until now. Norman stepped back, dart still in hand. I really think we should reevaluate this whole magical binding contract thing. I just have good reflexes. Nera stepped closer, studying his face with an intensity that made his skin prickle. What clan do you hail from, warrior? Your movements are beyond any Hollow High hunter I have faced. No clan, Norman sighed. Just a guy trying to sip cocktails on a beach and avoid politics. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if processing some puzzle. Then distant shouts cut through the clearing. Imperial voices distorted by helmets and amplified speakers. They come. Nera spat, her expression hardening into something primal. Her hand snapped forward, gripping Norman's wrist with surprising warmth and strength. Follow me. I know these jungles better than any Imperial fool. Norman hesitated, gaze flicking toward the tree line. Alone, he might have had a 60% chance of escape. With her, the variables change completely, but for better or worse. Fine, he muttered, shifting the dart into his pocket. Lead the way, Twilight Barbie. She shot him a confused glance at the nickname, but wasted no time moving through the undergrowth like living liquid. Norman trailed her, ducking and twisting as roots and vines clawed at his skin. At one point, she glanced over her shoulder, her green eyes glimmering. The arrow catching. Does it happen often among your people? Never, Norman replied between ragged breaths. In my world, we prefer to avoid arrows entirely. My ancestors spoke of a warrior who almost caught it, she said, her tone tinged with awe. He lost 2 fingers and was honored as a hero. You, you caught it without injury. Norman forced a laugh, wiping mud from his brow. Congratulations, I guess. Does this mean I get a coupon for a free dinner or something? Her eyes flicked to him, puzzled again, but there was a hint of a smile curling at her lips. They moved deeper, the jungle thickening into a maze of gnarled trunks and knotted vines. Above, the filtered light dimmed as though the forest itself was swallowing them whole. For the first time in what felt like forever, Norman felt the faintest flicker of something other than stress or battle instinct. It wasn't trust yet, but it was curiosity. He glanced back at Nera, her silhouette slicing through the foliage like a blade of moonlight. Vacation, huh? He whispered to himself. What the hell did you get yourself into this time, Arkin shot? The sounds of the jungle surged around them, the chirps of alien insects, the crackle of small creatures darting through the undergrowth, the distant echo of imperial orders barking in a language designed to intimidate. Norman moved as silently as possible, each step calculated, muscles taut like coiled plasma cables ready to spring. Behind them, Nera glided forward without hesitation, weaving through dense foliage like she was part of the landscape itself. She barely disturbed the ferns and giant leaves as she passed, her violet skin shimmering with every flicker of dappled light. At one point, she reached back to pull Norman forward by the wrist. Her fingers were strong and warm, surprisingly gentle for someone who had nearly assassinated him moments earlier. They will spread out soon, she whispered, her voice so low it barely rose above the soft rustle of leaves. Imperial scouts always split in quads when they lose a target. They will sweep the ground, scan the canopy, and check the water. We have minutes. Norman grunted, scanning the ground ahead, every instinct from his Black Ops days screaming at him to move faster, to double back, to mislead trackers. But Nera's knowledge of the terrain was undeniable. She didn't just run, she flowed as if each vine and root had grown to guide her. You're not wrong about their tactics, Norman muttered, ducking under a thick branch. I've seen those sweeps on Titan 9. They'll try to funnel us toward a kill zone. She glanced back, eyes glimmering with both surprise and something like approval. You speak as one of the hunted. Once or twice, Norman replied dryly. Usually ends with someone else regretting their life choices. A burst of blaster fire cracked nearby, followed by the roar of a small explosion. Nera tensed, ears twitching. They are close, she said. We must move into the heart. The heart, Norman repeated, nearly tripping over a root. She didn't answer. Instead, she veered sharply left, pulling him into a gnarled tunnel of tangled roots that formed a narrow passage beneath the jungle floor. The space was barely wide enough for Norman's broad shoulders. He had to crouch, breathing heavily as damp earth pressed close on all sides. Cozy, he muttered. Quiet, she corrected sharply, pressing a finger to her lips. Her movement slowed, every step measured, as if she was stalking prey. Norman mimicked her rhythm, each muscle straining against the urge to burst into a sprint. Above them, mechanical voices grew louder. Boots crunched overhead on fallen branches, and the whir of small scout drones buzzed like a nest of angry wasps. A few pebbles tumbled from the roof of their tunnel, brushing Norman's hair. Norman's breath caught. For a moment, he pictured an entire squad blasting the tunnel open, flooding it with stun gas or thermite. He knew the Empire's tactics too well, overwhelming force. No mercy, no witnesses. Nera froze suddenly, her hand flying to the blade at her thigh. She turned her body low, her eyes burning bright as they locked onto something behind them. Norman spun, but there was nothing. Just darkness and the damp echo of dripping water. Then he realized she wasn't reacting to a sound. She was reading the jungle itself, every shift in air, every tremor in the roots beneath their feet. A faint buzz approached. A micro-drone small enough to slip through a human palm hovered silently into view, its optic sensors gleaming red in the dim tunnel. Without hesitation, Nara lunged, her blade flashing in a blur. The drone crumpled to the dirt with a quiet sizzle, severed wires sparking feebly. Norman raised an eyebrow. Nice reflexes. I thought I was the only one catching flying death objects today. She shot him a quick, fierce glare, but he caught the corner of her mouth twitching. They pressed on until the tunnel finally sloped upward, spilling them out into another clearing. The sunlight here felt muted, filtered through layers of giant luminescent leaves that looked almost glassy. Strange flowers glowed faintly around the edges, giving the clearing an ethereal, dreamlike quality. Nara turned, chest rising and falling rapidly. "This is the heart," she said, gesturing around. "The jungle protects this place. No Imperial foot has ever touched it." Norman surveyed the area, his tactical mind automatically mapping exits cover and potential ambush points. But for the first time, he felt a momentary lull, a fragile silence before the next inevitable storm. "This place looks like a fever dream painted by a stoned artist," he murmured. "Fever? Dream?" Nara echoed, puzzled. "Never mind," Norman said, smirking. "It's beautiful. Let's leave it at that." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing as if trying to decode some hidden message. Then, without warning, she stepped closer, so close that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "You do not belong here," she said softly, her voice a low melodic hum that trembled on the edge of something more. "Yet you move as if the ground itself listens to you. You read the air, sense the enemy. You are not merely a vacationer." Norman looked away, the jungle suddenly feeling too close. Old habits, hard to die. She reached up, her fingers ghosting over the scar on his eyebrow. The touch was unexpectedly gentle, almost reverent. "This wound, you did not get this delivering tax forms." Norman snorted, his lips twitching. "No. That one came from a bar fight on Arcturus. Someone thought it'd be fun to put a knife in my face. Didn't end well for them." Nara studied him a moment longer, her bright green eyes impossibly deep. "You wear your battles like tattoos beneath your skin," she whispered. "You claim to seek rest, yet your spirit coils like a predator ready to strike." Before Norman could reply, a distant explosion shattered the fragile calm. Flames erupted far beyond the trees, and the shriek of engines pierced the air. Imperial dropships. Nara's gaze snapped to the treetops. "They are burning the outer jungle. They mean to drive us into the open." Norman clenched his jaw. "Classic perimeter flush. We need to move. Now." Nara's expression hardened. "There is a tunnel beyond this grove. It leads toward my people's sanctuary. It will be dangerous. They will not trust you." "Story of my life," Norman muttered, scanning the tree line. "Lead on." As they plunged into the dense foliage once more, Nara glanced back at him, something unreadable flickering across her fierce features. You move beside me like no other," she admitted, voice almost lost in the roar of approaching fires. "You are no prey. You are hunter, even without your flame whips." Norman allowed a small, rueful smile. "Don't go falling for me just yet, Violet girl. We still have a lot of running to do." Her lips parted in a silent laugh, and for a split second, even with the jungle burning behind them and death close on their heels, there was something like joy dancing in her emerald eyes. The tunnel Nara led them into was narrow and damp, winding deeper beneath the jungle floor. The walls were coated in a strange phosphorescent moss that glowed faintly, casting the space in an eerie, ghostly blue light. Norman's fingers brushed the wall occasionally, steadying himself on the slick surface as they navigated steep drops and sharp inclines. Each footstep echoed softly, 1,000 silent watchers listening from the dark. "You sure this doesn't lead straight into a pit full of spikes?" Norman quipped, though his voice was low tense. Nara glanced over her shoulder, her green eyes catching the glow. "You just even when hunted," she replied, almost sounding amused. "A true warrior spirit." "More like a coping mechanism," Norman muttered, adjusting his footing as they descended a sharp curve. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a cavern so vast it took Norman a full moment to process. The ceiling rose at least 30 meters high, dripping with massive stalactites that sparkled like frozen lightning bolts. Flickering torchlight danced across the cavern walls, illuminating hastily constructed shelters, repair stations, and clusters of fighters, humans, reptilian aliens, insectoid species, all working in a chaotic but determined rhythm. In the center stood a massive fire pit, surrounded by stone seats, the flames throwing ghostly shadows that flickered across the crowd. As they stepped into the cavern, heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence, weapons half raised in surprise or suspicion. Nara straightened her posture, regal powerful. "Be at ease," she called, her voice ringing out. "I bring one who has caught the Seeker's arrow. By our ancient law, he stands under my protection." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the rebels. An elderly alien with 2 heads shuffled forward, each head craning to examine Norman with yellow piercing eyes. Its small frame was draped in ceremonial cloth covered in ancient runes, giving it the air of a living relic. "I am Elder Crixcrax," both heads spoke in eerie unison. "Keeper of the old truths, guardian of the prophecy." Norman cleared his throat, raising one hand. "Hi, Norman. Just here for a vacation." "The prophecy." One head interrupted, eyes wide, while the other head scanned him slowly. The stranger with fire in his hands, and behind him, the hunter of the hollow high. "Together they shall shatter the Empire's shadow." "Oh, Norman began, but Nara cut him off with a sharp look. The elder motioned for others to bring torches. A group of warriors, some with scaled skin and others with iridescent chitin, carried flaming brands to a towering stone wall at the back of the cavern. Slowly, under the growing light, ancient paintings came into view, luminous pigments depicting 2 figures, one tall, wielding what looked like flaming tendrils, and another marked clearly as a hollow high hunter. Together, they faced down an ominous dark shape resembling an Imperial star cruiser. Norman felt the hairs on his neck rise. The flaming tendrils, they looked suspiciously similar to his Zeta Volta spine whips. "This is just a coincidence," Norman said, though his voice sounded thin even to his own ears. "The flame wielder," the elder whispered, both heads nearly trembling. "The one who commands fire born from the bones of stars. You carry the mark of battle on your brow and the spirit of a predator within." Vortak, a massive reptilian warrior with scales shimmering like molten metal, stepped forward, eyes narrowed dangerously. "Coincidence," he hissed. "Or a trick by Imperial agents to infiltrate our sanctuary. He has no flame weapons, no proof." Norman met his glare evenly. "I left my gear behind when I had to run for my life from your friendly neighborhood stormtroopers." Vortak's nostrils flared, his hand drifting toward a serrated blade at his hip. "Then he is useless. Send him to the Imperials. Or gut him now and hang his skull as warning." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Some rebels shifted nervously, while others looked to Nara, their hands wavering near their weapons. Norman exhaled slowly, the weight of 1,000 past missions pressing against his shoulders. "Listen," he began, stepping forward. I didn't come here to play your chosen one fantasy. I came for a tan, a drink maybe, to finally stop running. But the Empire doesn't let anyone live free, not even a burnt-out mercenary on a beach. He turned slightly, sweeping his gaze across the cavern. Faces stared back, scarred, weary, desperate. People who had lost worlds, families, entire futures to the Empire's boot. And if you think tossing me to the Imperials will buy you peace, you're fools. He continued, his voice rising with a steel edge. They'll burn this cavern, slaughter you. All, then tell the galaxy another terrorist nest has been cleansed. You know it, I know it. Nera watched him intently, a mix of awe and something deeper swirling in her emerald eyes. Your weapons, Crix demanded, suddenly both heads leaning forward eagerly. You spoke of flame whips. Can they be retrieved? Norman paused. His spine whips, those bone-like weapons harvested from apex predators on Zeta Volta, were locked in a case back at the resort if they hadn't already been confiscated. He met Nera's gaze. Can you get them? He asked low. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw setting with fierce determination. I am Hollow High, she replied with quiet pride. No Imperial tracker can outpace me in my jungle. A hush spread. Vortax snorted, spitting to the ground. Even if she returns, what then? The flame wielder is supposed to guide us, not just wave weapons. Crix turned toward Norman again. The prophecy says the flame wielder brings not just the fire but the knowledge of victory, strategy beyond our rigid code. Norman sighed, rubbing his temple. The weight of the moment pressed against him, merging with old ghosts of missions gone wrong and friends lost in the shadows. All right, he growled, finally, his voice low but resonant. I can teach you to fight smarter, live longer, but if I help you listen to me, no blind charges, no glory or death nonsense. A long pause. Then slowly, Crix nodded, both heads bowing in tandem. The flame wielder speaks, the elder announced. We shall listen. Nera stepped forward, closing the space between them. Up close, Norman could see flecks of silvery markings across her collarbones, ancient tattoos hidden beneath her armor. She studied him for a moment that felt like an eternity, then spoke softly so only he could hear. You have chosen to stay, to lead. Even without the flames in your hands, your heart already burns. Norman held her gaze, something fierce and vulnerable flickering in his eyes. I didn't choose this war, he murmured. But I can't ignore it anymore. Not now. The cavern's air grew heavier as the last echoes of Norman's declaration faded into the stone walls. A few rebels exchanged looks, some visibly relieved, others clearly doubting. Norman could almost taste their fear, a bitter tang mixed with desperation. Vortax's eyes never left him. The reptilian warrior paced like a caged beast, scales shimmering under the torchlight, each movement broadcasting danger. Norman turned his attention back to Crix, who watched him with a strange mixture of reverence and caution. The two-headed elder finally gestured toward a crude map etched into a stone slab nearby. Norman approached it, scanning the messy scrawls representing supply routes, hidden trails, and imperial outposts. This is your current strategy? Norman asked, eyebrow twitching. Crix nodded slowly. Direct assaults. Honor demands we face them head-on, disrupt their patrols, and show them our courage. Norman exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. That's not courage. That's suicide. A murmur swept through the rebels, some bristling at the insult. Vortax snarled, stepping forward. You insult our ways, you who cower behind trickery and hidden weapons. Norman's eyes snapped up, steel glinting in his gaze. You think you're fighting for honor. You think the Empire respects honor. They laugh at it. They design their training and gear to crush anyone who fights head-on. You've been playing into their hands this whole time. Vortax's claws flexed against the hilt of his blade. You speak poison. You corrupt our warrior's spirit. Crixcrax raised a hand, both heads speaking in eerie unison. Enough. Let him finish. Norman stepped closer to the map, his fingers tracing the routes. You want to survive. You stop thinking like heroes in a ballad and start thinking like ghosts in the jungle. You hit supply lines, sabotage water reservoirs, disrupt communications. You fight 1,000 tiny wars until the Empire bleeds itself dry trying to swat shadows. Silence spread like a viral pulse. For a moment, Vortak looked ready to pounce, his muscles, coiling jaw clenched. Then so sudden it caught everyone off guard, he relaxed, lips curling into a sinister smile. Perhaps, he said slowly, voice almost purring, you are right. Perhaps we need your wisdom to defeat our enemy. Norman frowned. The shift felt wrong, too smooth. Vortax's claws slid away from his blade, but his eyes glittered with something dark and electric. Nera, standing slightly behind Norman, stiffened. Her hand hovered close to her thigh blade, her nostrils flaring as she picked up a scent or a subtle movement no one else noticed. Norman leaned closer to the map, lowering his voice. Vortak is up to something, he whispered, barely audible. Stay sharp. Nera nodded, almost imperceptibly. Crixcrax seemed oblivious, rambling on about old legends and sacred duels. But Norman wasn't listening anymore. His mind snapped into Black Ops mode, reading micro-expressions, scanning body language, tracking every shift in the cavern. Then he saw it, a young rebel by the far wall, slowly edging toward a communications console. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his eyes flickering toward Vortak. Norman's pulse spiked. Without warning, he lunged across the cavern, closing the distance in a single blur. He yanked the young rebel back, smashing his wrist down against the console before the transmission could be sent. The snap of bone echoed through the cavern like a gunshot. The young rebel screamed, crumpling to the floor. Vortak roared in rage, his facade finally shattering. Traitor! He bellowed, his blade flashing from its sheath as he charged Norman. Time slowed. Norman's muscles moved before thought. He twisted, grabbing a torch from the wall and smashing the burning end into Vortak's face. The reptilian warrior howled, scales sizzling and popping under the heat. Norman pivoted again, planting a hard kick into Vortak's chest that sent him crashing into a group of stunned rebels. Nera dashed forward, pinning the young traitor to the floor with her knee blade pressed to his throat. "Who were you contacting?" she demanded, eyes wild with fury. The boy sobbed, blood dribbling from his lips. "Imperials," Vortak promised. "Safe passage if we turned him in. They'd spare us." The cavern erupted in chaos. Some rebels leapt to Vortak's defense, others turned on them, fists and blades clashing in an instant civil war. Norman ducked a wild swing from a disoriented insectoid warrior, driving his elbow into the creature's thorax before rolling away. "Nera," Norman shouted over the fray. "Secure the elder, we end this now." Nera nodded, flipping her blade to her reverse grip as she moved with lethal precision toward Crixcrax. The elder cowered behind two loyal guards, but they stepped aside quickly, their faith in Nera stronger than any orders. Norman and Nera's eyes met across the chaos. In that split second, there was no noise, no blood, just a silent promise. Vortak rose, wiping molten scale from his face, eyes gleaming with pure hate. "You ruined everything!" he shrieked, lunging again. Norman sidestepped, grabbing Vortak's blade arm and twisting. A sharp crack followed, and Vortak's scream cut the air. Norman followed up with a brutal knee to the snout, sending the warrior sprawling, dazed and choking. "You think you can buy freedom with betrayal," Norman hissed, standing over him. "You traded honor for survival, and you still lost." Vortak gurgled, his eyes rolling back as he collapsed completely. Around them, the rebels began to subdue the last of Vortak's supporters, shackling and restraining them. Some looked away in shame, others openly wept. Nera approached her, breathing heavy, her blade dripping faintly with greenish alien blood. "It is done," she said, voice trembling with adrenaline and disbelief. Crixcrack stepped forward, both heads bowing low. "The flame wielder has shown us truth," the elder rasped, reverence trembling in every word. "Through wisdom and might he cleanses the poison among us." Norman exhaled, shoulders sagging as the rush of combat faded. His eyes met Nera's, again softer now. "You all right?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. She nodded, stepping close. "I followed your lead," she whispered. "You see paths I cannot. You read hearts as easily as tracks in the jungle." Norman looked down at her, the swirling fire in her emerald gaze stirring something deep inside him. He lifted a hand, brushing away a smear of blood from her cheek. "I didn't want this," he admitted quietly. "But maybe it wanted me." Nera's lips parted, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart beneath. "Then let us choose it together," she breathed. For the first time in years, Norman allowed himself to consider that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't just running from something. Perhaps he was running towards something, something worth fighting for. The cavern was eerily silent after the betrayal had been snuffed out. Rebels moved cautiously, tending wounds and dragging the last of Vortak's loyalists into makeshift cells. Crixcrack shuffled back to the fire pit, both heads swaying in silent prayer, or maybe quiet shock. Norman stood off to the side, leaning over the crude map, his fingers tracing the attack routes he'd suggested. His mind buzzed with logistics, sabotage points, fallback positions, every neuron firing in tactical harmony. But something deeper, more primal, now pulsed beneath all that calculation purpose. Nera approached her movement smooth, yet taut with urgency. "It is time," she said softly, as though the words carried 1,000 years of weight. "I will retrieve your flame weapons." Norman turned to her sharply. "Alone." "You realize the resort is crawling with Imperials now. They're probably tearing my cabin apart as we speak." "I am hollow high," she replied, chin lifting. "I walk where they cannot see. Their machines hear only the jungle's heartbeat when I move." He studied her face, the wild defiance, the fierce loyalty burning bright. "You're not just retrieving weapons," he realized aloud. "You're staking everything. Your people's faith, your bond, even your life." Her eyes softened, her fingers brushing the edge of his hand. "I am already yours, Norman. This is simply proving it." Before he could argue further, she was gone, slipping into the shadows with a grace that defied logic. Norman watched the space she left behind, a twisting ache growing in his chest, something he hadn't felt since ever. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Norman spent them drilling rebel squads, reshaping their approach from reckless charges to coordinated hit-and-fade tactics. He taught them how to create simple yet effective traps using local flora, how to confuse heat sensors with reflective minerals, how to read an enemy's breath before their fingers even touched a trigger. Some rebels resisted at first, but after seeing Norman casually dismantle two of their strongest warriors during a sparring demonstration, no weapons, just instinct, their skepticism evaporated. He finished a mock raid exercise and scanned the cavern for Nera, still gone. A young insectoid rebel buzzed nervously at his sheet. Flame wielder. Will the hunter return? Norman forced a confident nod. She'll return. She's better than any operative I've ever known. But deep down, worry coiled around his heart like a constrictor. Hours later, a hush rippled through the cavern. Whispers spread like wildfire. She's back. Norman turned just as Nera emerged from the tunnel entrance. Her violet skin was marred with scratches, one arm bleeding from a gash that ran from her shoulder to her elbow. In her other arm, she clutched a long black case, his case. She dropped to one knee before him, offering the case as if it were a holy relic. I have brought them, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Norman rushed forward, kneeling beside her. You're hurt. It is nothing, she insisted, though her body trembled from exhaustion and blood loss. Open it. His hands flew across the case locks with practiced precision. The lid popped open, revealing two coiled objects that looked almost like fossilized spinal columns. Each vertebra gleamed with an oily sheen, raw and alien in their beauty. Norman's fingers hovered over them for a heartbeat, then wrapped around the hilt of the first whip. The moment he touched it, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the cavern like a distant thunderclap. Gasps echoed around them. Even the most battle-hardened rebels stepped back, some falling to their knees in awe. Norman stood the whip uncoiling down to the ground. He focused his mind, connecting to the neural interface hidden in the hilt. A surge of bioluminescent energy shot down the spine, each vertebra igniting in a dazzling cascade until the entire length pulsed with bright, shifting, flame-like light. Crix-Crax collapsed forward, both heads bowing deeply. The flame wielder. It is true. Norman snapped the whip experimentally. The sound cracked through the cavern like a sonic boom, scattering embers and rattling nearby weapons. The energy radiating from it washed over the rebels, warming their faces and igniting their spirits. Nera, still kneeling, looked up at him with wide, tear-bright eyes. You truly are the one, she breathed. You carry fire not just in your hands, but in your soul. Norman exhaled, eyes locked on the writhing energy twisting along the whip. These aren't just weapons, he said, his voice low and dangerous. They're a promise that when I come for you, nothing in this galaxy can stop me. He turned back to the crowd, his expression darkening. The Empire has mistaken our patience for weakness. We don't fight to die gloriously. We fight to win. And now we have the tools to make them bleed from every shadow, every hidden path, every whispered rumor. The rebels erupted in a deafening cheer. Some pounded their chests, others lifted improvised blades into the air. The atmosphere turned electric. The hopelessness that once clung to them now ignited into fierce resolve. Norman returned to Nera, pulling her gently to her feet. His hand lingered on her cheek, smearing dirt and blood away. You brought me back more than my weapons, he said softly. You reminded me who the hell I am. She shivered under his touch, her hand rising to rest over his heart. And you reminded me what it means to choose not just to follow tradition, but to fight beside someone worth fighting for. Norman's jaw tightened. He bent closer, their foreheads touching. Stay with me, he murmured. We finish this together. Nera nodded, her eyes ablaze. Until the last breath, until the last star fades. Behind them, Crix-Crax shuffled forward again. What now, flame wielder? When do we strike? Norman stepped back, spine whip still crackling with ghostly fire. His voice dropped into a low, razor-sharp timbre that cut through every heart present. Now, he said, tonight we show the Empire what it means to fear the dark. The crowd roared so loud it felt like the cavern itself shook. Norman didn't flinch. He stood at the center, glowing weapon in hand. Nera at his side, no longer a lone mercenary or a reluctant hero, but a storm waiting to break. Night fell over Luma 9 like a shroud of ink, the triple moons hovering above like watchful gods. The jungle pulsed with alien life sounds, blending into a primal symphony that echoed in the rebels' bones. Inside the cavern, the energy was electric. Rebels armed themselves with makeshift explosives, scavenged blasters, and bone-forged blades. The fire pit at the center blazed higher than ever before, casting towering shadows that flickered and danced across ancient walls, shadows that now resembled warriors preparing for an eternal fight. Norman stood at the edge of the map table, spine whip curled loosely around his forearm, energy still faintly sparking along its vertebrae. His other hand tapped the map surface rhythmically as he watched squads review their assignments. "Remember," Norman said, his voice low but slicing through the noise like a blade. "We're not charging the front gates like suicidal songbirds. We hit them where it hurts their supply lines, their comm hubs, their fuel depots. We sow chaos, not glory." A grizzled human commander nodded, his cybernetic eye whirring softly as he scanned a list. "Our people are used to charging head-on. This is different." Norman met his gaze. "Different is why you'll still be breathing tomorrow." Nearby, Nera watched him with a focus so intense it felt like she was burning his image into her soul. Dressed in fresh armor, reinforced with jungle-forged bone plates, her violet skin glowed faintly in the torchlight. She wore two curved blades strapped across her back, and her eyes shone like two bright emerald stars. When she stepped closer, the noise seemed to drop away. "They follow you now," she murmured, eyes sweeping across the busy cavern. "Not just because of prophecy, but because you gave them a reason to believe they might live." Norman's mouth twitched into a half-smile, one that carried more exhaustion than joy. "We'll see how much they still believe once blaster bolts start flying." A low rumble reverberated through the rock underfoot, as if the planet itself growled in warning. Rebels paused, glancing around with wary eyes. Norman stiffened. "That's no earthquake." Suddenly, a young scout burst into the cavern, his breathing ragged face streaked with mud and panic. "Imperial dropships inbound," he screamed. "Multiple units, heavy armor support, they've found us." The cavern erupted in chaotic shouts. Some scrambled for weapons, others ran to reinforce barricades at the tunnel entrances. Sparks danced in the air as old energy shields flickered to life, throwing up transparent walls of pale blue light. Norman clenched his jaw. "It was only a matter of time," he muttered, turning to Crixcrax, who trembled visibly beside the map. "Get your non-combatants into the deeper tunnels, now!" Crixcrax nodded rapidly, both heads chanting prayers as they hobbled away to command evac groups. Norman's gaze snapped to Nera. "We can't hold them here forever. We need to draw them into the jungle where their numbers mean nothing." Nera's lips parted in a fierce grin. "Finally, the hunt truly begins." Norman touched the comm device embedded in his wrist, a remnant from his covert days. A soft beep acknowledged the link. "Torrent," he growled. "Status." A mechanical voice, calm and almost dispassionate, crackled in reply. "Commander Arkenshot, stealth approach completed. Orbital strike solutions available. Automated combat readiness at 97%. Nera's eyes widened as she listened. "The torrent. It is real." Norman gave her a grim nod. "And it's about to introduce itself." Outside, the first plasma mortars rained down thunderous booms, shaking dust from the cavern roof. The forward tunnel suddenly glowed orange molten rock, spilling in from a direct hit. "Move!" Norman bellowed, his voice echoing like a battle horn. He charged toward the main exit, rebels scrambling to follow. As they emerged into the moonlit jungle, the world ignited in a brutal, surreal ballet. Imperial troops pushed through the undergrowth in tight formations, floodlights slicing between massive roots. Overhead drones zipped in synchronized swarms, their red optics scanning for movement. Norman didn't hesitate. With a flick of his wrist, his spine whip ignited again, snaking forward and carving through a frontline trooper's helmet like paper. Sparks and a gory mist lit the night sky. A second trooper swung around only to be caught in Nara's dual blades. She twisted her movements almost dance-like, slicing across armored plates with inhuman grace. All around them, rebels surged out of hidden burrows and tree hollows, attacking in sudden bursts before melting back into the shadows. Explosions rocked fuel carts, shrapnel ripping holes in tightly packed Imperial squads. Norman moved through the chaos like a phantom. One moment he severed an enemy's leg with a precise whip strike. The next he hurled an improvised explosive behind enemy lines, scattering entire platoons. His mind tracked dozens of micro-battles at once, every rebel's position, every enemy choke point. At one point, Nara landed beside him, panting, her blades dripping with alien ichor. "They are breaking," she cried. Norman cracked a rare grin, pure adrenaline burning in his veins. "We're not done yet." He raised his wristcom again. "Torrent, commence orbital distraction bombardment. Avoid our jungle sector." A pause. Then, "Confirmed, Commander. Firing." A second later, the sky turned to dawn. Bright beams of focused plasma stabbed downward from orbit, vaporizing distant ridgelines and turning Imperial landing pads into smoldering craters. Ships exploded like firework petals, and entire armored columns simply vanished in sudden eruptions of molten earth. The Imperial lines shattered. Soldiers fled, some tossing weapons aside in blind panic, others screaming into comms that only crackled with static. Rebels howled in triumph, charging with renewed fury. Norman watched it all, his spine whip coiled loosely at his side, its last flickers of energy illuminating his face like a war god in meditation. In the lull, Nara stepped forward, her expression wild with exhilaration and fierce pride. She threw her arms around his neck, breathless. You turned the tide of an entire world." Norman's arm slipped around her waist, grounding them both amid the madness. "I didn't turn it. I just reminded them they had the power to do it all along." Above them, the sky glowed with the torrent's silent wrath. Imperial reinforcements already burning before they could even land. The Empire's infamous steel grip now looked like a trembling hand trying to catch smoke. Nara pulled back, her forehead resting against his. "You lead them not as a god, but as one of them," she whispered, "and they would follow you into the abyss itself." Norman's fingers threaded through her hair, his own voice low and rough. "Then let's make sure the abyss is theirs, not ours." With that, he turned to the battlefield, his gaze locking onto distant figures already scattering in retreat. A cold, predatory smile spread across his face, the same expression that had haunted Imperial intelligence reports for years. The Spectre had returned. The jungle's midnight chorus had become a symphony of chaos. Explosions and screams intertwined with the cries of alien beasts startled from their slumber. Above, the triple moons watched in silent horror as the Empire's proud war machine unraveled into panic and retreat. Norman stood at the edge of the clearing, his spine whip coiled loosely in his hand, glowing with a ghostly blue-white fire that pulsed like a heartbeat. His armor now bore countless slash marks and burns, yet he stood straight, almost eerily calm, as if he'd finally stepped back into a skin that had always been waiting. Nara landed beside him, sliding across the mud as if gravity bent to her will. Her violet skin was slick with sweat and speckled with enemy blood. She wore a grin that was half predator, half victorious goddess. "They're broken," she gasped, voice trembling from the high of battle. "Their center is gone. Their command chain shattered. They scatter like prey in a stampede." Norman's eyes narrowed as he scanned the tree-line senses, reaching beyond mere sight. He could almost feel the shift, the pulse of terrified soldiers pinging off each other like lost comets. "Good," he growled, his voice low-edged in iron. "Now it's time to drive the dagger deeper." A sudden commotion snapped his attention upward. The clouds above twisted and split as if some angry titan had clawed the sky apart. A silent silhouette descended, framed by swirling vapor. The torrent. Its hull shimmered with black alloy so dark it seemed to drink the moonlight, each sharp edge betraying its predatory purpose. Weapon ports glowed faintly beneath its skin, like the breath of a dragon holding back flame. On the Empire's comm channels, which Norman could still hear via his covert implants, terrified screams erupted. "Impossible. It's real. The Spectre's ship is real. Get us out. Get us out." Norman allowed himself a rare cold smile. Nara watched the ship descend, her mouth slightly open, pupils blown wide with wonder and fear. It lives," she whispered, voice almost reverent. "Your storm in the void. The stories, they did not exaggerate." Norman glanced at her, the smirk never leaving his face. "They usually underestimate." A thin crackle came through his wristcom. "Commander!" A familiar voice announced Thorn, his former second-in-command. "Torrent operational. Main batteries primed. Awaiting final directives." Norman straightened, spine whip sizzling to full light. "Begin orbital sweep. Target their heavy artillery first. Disable all escape craft. But leave command units alive. I want them to watch this planet slip away piece by piece." "Understood, sir," Thorn replied, voice as crisp as ever. Above, the torrent shifted. Its underbelly split open in petal-like segments, revealing massive energy capacitors glowing like newborn stars. The first shot fired a focused lance of plasma that cut through the night sky and bored straight into the Empire's main artillery position on the ridge. The blast disintegrated the battery in a heartbeat, the shockwave flattening trees for hundreds of meters. A second beam lanced sideways, vaporizing a shuttle trying to lift off. It didn't explode, it simply ceased to exist, reduced to radiant vapor. On the ground, Imperial soldiers dropped to their knees, weapons clattering into the mud. Some fled blindly into the jungle, only to be picked off by rebel skirmishers. Others simply stared at the sky eyes, vacant, whispering prayers to gods that would never answer. Norman's comm crackled again. "Commander," Thorn reported, "Imperial High Command's orbital surveillance detected our arrival. They are attempting to scramble reinforcements from adjacent systems." Norman snorted. "And 17 fleets are refusing orders. 20 more report communication failures. The seeds you planted, they've grown, sir." A laugh bubbled up in Norman's throat, sharp, dark, but not unkind. "Good. Let them rot in their own cowardice." Nara stepped closer, her hand gripping his forearm, her eyes burning like twin emerald comets. "You have turned their empire to dust in one night," she breathed. "Not even in our ancestors' wildest chance did they imagine such fury." Norman turned to her, his expression suddenly softer. This was never about fury. It was about ending their lie. About showing every world that monsters can bleed and that they should be the ones to run. Suddenly, an explosion tore through the underbrush to the right. Norman and Nara snapped around in unison, blades and whip raised. Out of the smoke stumbled Vortak, or what was left of him. His scales were cracked and charred, one arm hung limp and twisted, his eyes wild with pain and rage. "You, traitor!" Vortax snarled, froth and blood flying from his jaws. You think you can bind my people to your human arrogance. You are a disease, a false prophet. Norman stepped forward, whip buzzing at his side. We gave them a choice, Vortac. You chose fear. They chose freedom. Vortac roared, surging forward with a massive two-handed cleaver raised high. For a moment, the jungle seemed to pause as if even the moonlight wanted to see how this would end. Norman moved first. The whip snapped forward a blazing arc of energy that struck Vortac's blade, splitting it in two like butter. The reptilian warrior staggered but pressed on, claws swinging wildly. Norman ducked under one swipe, drove a vicious elbow into Vortac's gut, then pivoted and lashed the whip upward. The vertebrae snapped against Vortac's chest, shattering armor and flaying scales. With a final howl of agony, Vortac collapsed to his knees, clawing at the ground as his blood pooled around him like dark oil. Norman stepped close, whip sizzling. You wanted to be remembered, he hissed, voice like a cold blade. Now you will be as the last coward of a broken empire. He lashed forward once more, clean and precise. Vortac's head fell silently into the mud. For a heartbeat, there was no sound. Then the jungle erupted in 1,000 different ways. Cheers, war, cries, screams of surrender. Norman turned back to Nera, his breath ragged. She stepped forward and threw her arms around him, her forehead pressing into his chest as her entire body trembled. It is done, she whispered, voice shaky but strong. The Empire, it has no hold here now. Norman's arms wrapped around her tightly, chin resting on her head. It's only the beginning, he said softly. A galaxy still waits. But this is our world now. High above the torrent continued its slow, silent orbit. Its targeting beams flickered across the jungle floor, each one an unspoken promise. We see you. We protect you. We will finish what we start. Rebel fighters emerged from the tree line, some limping, some supporting wounded comrades. They raised their weapons to the sky, chanting Norman's name, chanting for the flame wielder and the hunter of Hollowhigh. Cricks-cracks shuffled forward, both heads lifted toward the moons. The prophecy, fulfilled, they cried, their voice echoing like thunder in the clearing. The flame wielder has broken the Empire's shadow. A new dawn begins. Norman looked at Nera, their foreheads pressed together. Her tears glimmered like morning dew, but her smile outshone every star above. You gave me purpose, she whispered. And you gave me something worth burning the stars for, Norman replied. In the distance, the last Imperial shuttles attempted to flee, only to be vaporized by the torrent's watchful gaze. The rest of the soldiers dropped to their knees or vanished into the night, never to raise a blaster under the Empire's banner again. Norman lifted his wristcom one last time. Thorn, he said, voice calmer than it had ever been. Secure all major installations. Send word to the network. The Spectre has returned. The galaxy changes tonight. Confirm, Commander, Thorn replied. And welcome back. Norman let out a slow, measured breath, feeling years of tension drain from his shoulders. He turned to Nera fully, his fingers sliding into her hair, pulling her into a deep, fierce kiss. Around them, the world shifted. The Empire crumbled. 1,000 new alliances sparked in hidden corners of the galaxy. And for the first time in years, Norman felt not as a ghost, not as a weapon, but as a man finally alive. The first pale rays of Luma 9's dawn crept across the battered jungle, revealing a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Craters still smoked like dormant volcanoes, shattered Imperial armor lay scattered like fallen titans, and the once oppressive hum of Imperial comms had gone utterly silent. For the first time in generations, the air felt free. Rebel fighters moved slowly through the clearing, helping each other bandage wounds and gathering surrendered Imperials. Some sat in small clusters holding hands, staring at the sky as if learning how to breathe again. Norman stood near the remains of the central command post, his spine whip now coiled and inert at his side. His armor bore deep gashes, scorched handprints, and splatters of both friend and foe's blood, but his eyes, once tired, haunted, now burned with a quiet, unwavering certainty. Nera approached from behind her steps so soft he only sensed her presence through the heat radiating off her skin. She no longer wore her hunter's war paint. Her violet skin gleamed clean save for the constellation-like scars of recent battle. "You've been standing here for hours," she murmured, slipping under his arm and resting her head against his chest. "Watching the sun rise," Norman replied, his voice low and steady. "First one I've seen in a long time that didn't mean run or die." Nera chuckled softly, a sound that vibrated through him like a welcome tremor. "Our ancestors believed the first light after a great battle carried the whispers of those who fell. They said it was their way of telling us to live well." Norman tilted his head, considering that. "Then I guess I owe them a good show." They stood there in silence, watching as rebels began raising a makeshift banner, the sigil of Hollow High newly merged with a stylized flame motif symbolizing their new alliance. Crix-Crax shuffled toward them both, heads bowed deeply. The elders' thin voices trembled with emotion. "Flame Wielder Hunter of Hollow High, the council has met. We have decided you must lead us into this new era, together." Norman exhaled, his gaze drifting skyward. "I'm no king," he said finally, shaking his head. "I've spent most of my life making sure no one could ever control me again. I won't start now." Crix-Crax tilted both heads curiously. "But you united them. You shattered the Empire's hold. You brought the Torrent a ghost from the stars." Norman looked back at Nera, his arm tightening around her. "I didn't come here to rule. I came here because I was lost. She showed me that there's more to life than running or fighting." Nera lifted her eyes to meet his, her fingers brushing over the scar across his eyebrow. "Among my people," she said softly, "a warrior who refuses a throne is considered the purest leader, one who fights for the people, not power." Norman smirked, his thumb tracing her jawline. "Well, lucky for me, I never wanted a throne, just maybe a good chair and someone who understands why I can't sit still for long." Crix-Crax chuckled, both heads bobbing. "Then let the galaxy hear it, the Flame Wielder and the Hunter shall guide, not rule, and they shall remain guardians of Luma 9 and beyond." A cheer rose from the rebels gathered around. They pressed fists to hearts, weapons raised high. For the first time, these warriors weren't fighting to die, they were preparing to live. That evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of violet and silver, Norman and Nera stood at the edge of the landing platform. Before them sat a sleek shuttle painted in midnight black and trimmed with Hollow High tribal etchings. Nera eyed it suspiciously. "So, this is your idea of a quiet retreat?" Norman grinned, the expression making him look impossibly young. "Trust me, you've never seen anything like it." They stepped aboard the hatch, closing behind them with a soft hiss. The shuttle's interior was minimalist, but elegant, illuminated by gentle blue lighting that made Nera's skin look like living starlight. As they strapped in, Norman leaned toward the console. "Torrent confirmed coordinates for Cassius 6 orbital villa." "Confirmed, Commander," the AI replied in its calm, emotionless tone. "Honeymoon suite prepared. Atmospheric pool stabilized. All amenities functional." Nera blinked, her eyes darting across the interior. "What is a honeymoon suite?" Norman paused, a mischievous spark in his eye. It's a human tradition. After a battle, or more accurately, after a union, a couple isolates themselves to celebrate. No wars, no politics. Just us. Nara's brow furrowed, her warrior mind trying to parse this foreign concept. And the purpose of this celebration? Norman leaned in closer, his voice dropping into a low, intimate rumble. To remember why we fight, why we survive. A faint blush spread across Nara's cheeks, her lips parting slightly. And this tradition lasts how long? Typically a few weeks, Norman replied with a teasing glint. But I think given the size of the empire we just crushed, we deserve at least 6 months. Nara laughed, a sound so pure it echoed around the cabin like a living song. Then she grabbed his collar, pulling him into a kiss that tasted of fire and starlight. Hours later, the shuttle hovered above Cassius 6, an enormous gas giant ringed with shimmering aurora-like bands. Orbiting it was the villa, a transparent dome structure floating gracefully among the rings, built with advanced force fields and gravity manipulations. They stepped into the main chamber, a vast open space with a starlight pool at its center. Bioluminescent water rippled softly, glowing like liquid constellations. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the planet's swirling colors and distant stars. Nara stood in silent awe, her hand reaching out to the glass, as if she could touch the drifting meteoroids beyond. "This is where you wanted to escape," she whispered. Norman stepped up behind her, arms circling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "No, this is where I wanted to begin." She turned her eyes impossibly bright. "And what are we to begin?" "Our story," Norman replied without hesitation. "For years my story was written in blood and shadows, yours in duty and old laws. Here, we write something new, something that's just ours." Her lips trembled, her warrior stoicism melting in the glow of the starlight. "Among my people," she murmured, voice almost breaking, "such words are spoken only in the deepest bonding ritual, a vow that can never be broken." Norman brushed a tear from her cheek. "Then let me say it clearly. I choose you. Not because of any prophecy, not because of any war. I choose you because you are the first place I've ever wanted to stay." Nara lunged forward, pressing her forehead to his, her hands tangling into his hair. For a long moment they stood locked together, as if the universe itself had paused to witness them. Outside, a shooting star flared across the gas giant's rings, leaving a trail that slowly faded into the endless dark. They finally broke apart just enough to breathe. Nara's voice trembled with laughter and tears all at once. 6 months, you said?" Norman chuckled, pulling her toward the glowing pool. 6 months to start. Then, we'll see if I can negotiate an extension." She snorted, tackling him backward into the water with surprising strength. They surfaced laughing, the luminescent water swirling around them like a living nebula. Their kisses were fierce and gentle, their touches lingering as if both were afraid the other might vanish. But there was no more empire, no more shadows, just the warmth of a future neither had dared to imagine. As the villa drifted silently through Cassius 6's rings, a soft message scrolled across the hidden tactical console in the chamber. "Spectre online. Imperial collapse ongoing. Galactic transition authority forming. Awaiting your return. No immediate action required." Norman's eyes found it, but he ignored it, choosing instead to focus on Nara, who floated beside him, her violet skin shimmering like a newly born galaxy. For the first time in decades, he let the war fade from his mind. He let himself be just Norman, not the specter, not the flame wielder, just a man finally home.